Here we go. Welcome to the Ecstatic Business Show. I am so honored to introduce you to Christine McKay, my dear friend from one of our masterminds, and so much fun. This woman has a Harvard MBA, but her story is unlike anything you have probably heard in terms of how she got there. So I'm really excited to share her story. But Christine, I want us to dive right in and talk about negotiation and Venn Zone and this work that you're doing teaching people how to negotiate from a place of love and power simultaneously. So, why don't you just start by unpacking what is your big mission? What is the work that you're doing in the world?
So I really dislike bullies, like on a
Mm.
level. I was bullied as a kid horrifically, and I have this innate disdain for people who pick on other people. And so I don't like when larger companies or companies with more power bully a smaller mid-market company. I hate that. And I've negotiated with half the Fortune 500 across 55 countries. I taught negotiation at big companies. And so I know the tricks they play. I know the tricks that small technology companies play. I know the tricks that narcissists play. I know those games that they play. And so I'm really passionate about leveling the playing field. And one of
Mm.
the things we see in the market is there's this common misconception that just because I'm in business, I'm supposed to be a good negotiator. Or just because I'm in business, I am a good negotiator, which is even worse. And neither of those are true because very, very few people spend very much time practicing negotiation, reading about negotiation, going to many seminars and training, reading, a variety of books to get not just negotiation training, but constantly thinking about it. So this long weekend, I finished The History of Standard Oil Company, which was written in 1904. I took an online course on quantum mechanics. I started reading about the archaeological history of the Palestinian, Lebanese, Israeli region. And I can take lessons from every one of those subjects and apply it
Mhm.
directly to negotiation, which is one of the things I love about it because it requires just a core curiosity, almost like a childlike curiosity. And most people they don't do those things. That's not who they are. They focus on tactics and price and just getting the deal done. And that's their metric. Oh, I got it signed, so it was a good deal. But you don't know until 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 6 months into the living the deal, whether the deal was good. So
Yeah.
I like bringing that to smaller businesses.
Oh, there's so many things that I love in there. I love the leveling the playing field for the little guy, making sure that David has the right stones in his pocket when he goes up against Goliath. And I also love this idea that negotiation isn't about the money or the transaction, that when you're getting into this, you are pulling from everything you have ever studied, from psychology to archaeology to quantum mechanics. Like, I think this is why we have so much fun having conversations, because that I share that same passionate breadth of curiosity. And again, I love business for the same reason, that it forces me to show up with all of me every day. And I don't just get to be little pigeonholed in a box. I have to be diverse and deep at the same time. So where did this all come from? So we have a little bit about this. You shared a little bit about your story that you were bullied growing up, don't like bullies now, but how did you get into negotiation? How did you become passionate about this topic?
So career wise, I started negotiating early in my career. I started doing international mergers and acquisitions for what's now Verizon. And I learned how to negotiate in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia. Then started moving north and Hong Kong, Japan. And so South Korea was huge. It was a very important place for me in my negotiation journey.
Mm.
And as a woman in the mid 1990s, so in South Korea, for example, there were no women who worked in buildings. They didn't clean the buildings. They were not admins. They just did not exist in most
Mm.
businesses. Some businesses, yes, but there were offices I went to where there were no women's bathrooms. And in order for me to learn how to be successful, I had to ditch my very red, white, and blue blood flowing through me from Montana. I had to like put that aside, and I had to say, what do I need to learn to be successful here? And we were negotiating really huge deals with governments. We weren't playing around. It was big things. And so I learned how to negotiate there. And I've been able to take that all over the world with me. And a lot of my negotiation has been outside the United States, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Central America. So I've really been able to negotiate all over. And those lessons that I learned as a woman in Southeast Asia were pivotal at the time and continue to influence how I approach negotiation.
Give some examples. Like, what were some of the lessons that you learned? I know you said you had to ditch your red, white, and blue blood and I think it is important when we're in a new culture to not bring our prejudices to the table. But give me an example. Like, what specifically did you learn from that?
So one of my biggest lessons in Jakarta, when I was there, Indonesia was ruled by a dictator. So I had a very specific view of what a dictatorial government looked like and how
Mhm.
that might influence or not business. And I learned from a young woman there. We were at a club and this big guy was standing behind us and he was being a jerk. And she spun around at one point and said, "Buddy, this is a free country. I can do whatever I want." And I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute. What the heck do you mean you live in a dictatorship? What do you mean that you can do whatever you want?" I was like, my mind was blown. But it was a moment that I learned that freedom was an individually defined thing and that government can't define it. And
Mm.
so that simple lesson, it seems like a simple lesson to learn. That lesson opened my eyes to the possibility that the world as I thought it was nothing like what I thought it was. The
Mm.
people that I thought I had a view of what people were like, and it was completely wrong. And learning that lesson early in my career really made a difference because I can set aside in any negotiation I do, in any interaction I am in, I can set aside what I think I know about this person, what I think I know about the organization I'm negotiating, what I think I know about negotiation, and what I think I know about myself. I can set all of that aside and I can say, just let me learn and help me find the solution, that let's look for a solution that works for both parties. And so that was one of the big lessons I learned. And another really big lesson I learned is that no negotiation is one-on-one ever,
Hmm.
ever. Even if you're negotiating with your partner, it is not one-on-one. There
Mm.
are, we as human beings are an amalgamation of all of our experiences. There's a really good book by a Stanford professor called Determined that's out right now. And it is based on his whole premise is that there's no such thing as free will, that everything we do is implanted in us from where we grew up to how we speak to, how our parents were, their background. It's a really interesting premise. And
Mhm.
when I think about that and I think about how people behave in negotiation, right? People who react negatively in a negotiation are never reacting to me. They're
Mm.
always reacting to something that I reminded them from from their past. And
Absolutely.
as soon as I can recognize that, right, then I have the ability to move forward in the conversation because I don't have to get emotional about it. I don't have to take it
Mhm.
personally. And that was something I learned in Southeast Asia all those years ago, is that I could have a bunch of people around me, talking and not understanding a word that they're saying. All right,
Mhm.
not understanding what they're writing down. I don't can't read the language, and
Yeah.
just being okay. And then the third
Mm.
lesson I learned is to ask for help. When I
Mm.
went to South Korea, we just removed a woman as the country manager because she was too feminist. And so my CFO asked me if I would go there. And I was like, well, is this a setup for failure or what? I don't know about this. But I was so hungry to learn. I was like, oh, I'm all in on one condition. And that is that the company provide me an attaché who's a guy who teaches me how to behave in this culture, who sets me up for success. And so my attaché was a guy he played on the Korean National Baseball League. And we'd walk down the street, people would stop him for autographs all the time. He made sure I knew where to sit in a car, who to bow to, how low to bow, who to speak to, who was the decision maker, and so asking for help and knowing that you're never negotiating by yourself, because there's always somebody outside of us that's part of that conversation. Like when I negotiate with my husband, there's always my kids that are in the back of my mind. When I'm
Mm.
negotiating with a CEO, his or her board is in my mind, or their employees are in my mind. Those are silent negotiators at the table. And Asia
Mhm.
taught me about that population of negotiators.
Honoring the silent negotiators that aren't sitting at
Mhm,
the table but still have a voice. All right. I mean,
mhm.
we talk about the family constellation. Even in your own head, you have multiple voices and you bring them around the table and you let them all speak and say their mind. And then there's this central negotiator who's listening to all of the concerns and the values and the needs and saying, okay, this is what we as a corporate body called Caitlin are going to do moving forward. So it's fascinating that this concept of negotiation can be even at an individual psychological level of how do we negotiate our own internal voices. And then at a bigger, like the next level up is like interpersonal negotiating with a spouse or our children. Yeah, I have a now 12 going on 21-year-old. She's so feisty and articulate and loves debate. And so we're now realizing like just autocratic dictation of this is what you will do is no longer working. And so having to figure out how to negotiate and have her have a sense of buy-in to what she's doing with her life. It's just fascinating. And then we get to this business level. And this is where I'm really curious to hear more just how do you define this negotiation process? How is it different from sales, let's say, or different from just traditional communication? Because you do this professionally for Fortune 500 companies, like you are at the table where, as you and I spoke before the interview, not many women are at this table. And you are not just at the table, you're facilitating these conversations. So let's kind of go into that. What makes negotiation different from other forms of communication? And what allows you to be so good at it in these very high echelon rooms that you're invited into?
So I think the big thing is that, you mentioned kind of this individual negotiation, and that actually plays because into kind of the bigger negotiation, because the hardest part of any negotiation sits between our ears, right? We
Mhm.
we are taught not to ask, especially as women, we're taught not to ask. And so when we get to, the a bigger organization, and our clients tend to be, in the 10 to 150 million in revenue, and then they're negotiating with those big guys. And so there's a misconception that sales is negotiation. Like
Yeah.
that is the negotiation. They do typically a part of negotiation. But if they're in an organization that's more than and even if they're solo entrepreneurs and they look at a contract or they get a contract, they're likely to punt it to their attorneys who don't care about your business. They
Mhm.
care about the legal terms. They are not looking at anything commercial. They will not touch anything that is commercial. because it's too much of a liability for them. And they can just say, well, you should know your business. So if it has anything to do with finances, if it has anything to do with operations, if it has anything to do with strategy, if it has anything to do with cash flow or profitability, they're out. They're not looking at that stuff. So what ends up happening is that when we're selling, we're influencing a decision to buy. So that's a part of the negotiation. What most people do is also they think about price. So they start talking about price, but that's not negotiating, that's haggling. And there's a big difference between the two. So what I see a lot of sales teams do, a lot of people in sales, is they haggle. And part of that is because they don't understand all the levers that they can pull from a negotiation perspective. I have yet to meet a salesperson who understands contracts very deeply, who like can sit and look at a contract and say, oh, there's cost in this. If we agree to this, then I have to recapture that somehow in price. They tend to go in with some either being told kind of a price or a range of prices, or they kind of wing it on, they come up, they say, oh, this feels right. Or,
Which is why it drives the operations people crazy.
Right, exactly. Because then they're like, how do I deliver this? You sold something and I don't have any. I see this a lot in IT where sales will get way ahead of product development and engineering. And then they come back and say, oh, this company bought it. And the engineers are going, well, I don't know how the heck I'm going to deliver that.
Right.
That's not on our roadmap for another 2 years, right? And there's an implication to that that's much broader than just delivering that to that client. You're resource constrained. So are you going to bring in new resources at a higher cost? Are you going to divert from your previous plan to this new plan? What's the economic impact of that? Are there going to be other customers who want this thing? And if not, can you recapture all the costs? That's negotiation. That's negotiation, looking across the broader part of the organization and looking at how does this relationship, this sales relationship, influence the rest of my organization? What can work for the different departments and what doesn't? A really good example is when I was working with a company, it was about 120 million in revenue. And we were negotiating a really big contract with Verizon. It was an IT company. And I sat down with the head of HR. And she's like, I have no idea why you're talking to me. And I said, there are 7 pages in this contract that are HR related. Everything from drug testing to background checks to how you onboard to how you do evaluations to how you let somebody go, the training that you do. 7 pages. And she'd been doing been in that role for almost 30 years, and she'd never had somebody come talk to her about a contract. And that's a stunning indictment on business on people overall, because they just aren't looking at what are all the pieces that we can play with that give us a better negotiated outcome.
I love that. And so, practically speaking, when we are going into an introduction, I love the distinction you made between negotiation is not haggling, right? Haggling is like, I want the same thing, but I just want it half price, right? And you're just focused on one key element and saying like, nope, give it to me, give me exactly what you just promised, but do it cheaper, right? And that's not negotiation, right? Negotiation is how do we find win-wins for both parties? And usually it's not around the money. As I've learned in sales, there are people who are willing to pay significantly more for things that actually solve their problems. Like I find it so easy to close $100,000 done for you option. And sometimes I seriously struggle to sell a $10,000 done with you option because the thing that my client prioritizes is their time, right? So this is where understanding what does the person on the other side of the table genuinely care about, I think has been the most valuable thing for me, is because usually nobody, like, yes, price is a consideration, but it's not even the first one for most people when they're making their buying decision. It's usually the last one. Like, if I can have everything else that I want, now we can talk about how much is it going to actually cost me to get it. So practically speaking, I'd love to kind of, as you're thinking about, because we work with small female entrepreneurs primarily, what are some practical things that they can be doing in their own lives to just get better at this negotiation process?
So, I mean, negotiation from a process perspective is pretty easy. Or it appears easy. Let me put it that way.
It's like
So,
Othello. It takes 5 minutes to learn, a
yeah,
lifetime to
yeah,
master.
exactly. Yeah. So the first thing is spend 80% of your time preparing, like really prepare. And I don't just mean like just go out and spend 10 minutes or half an hour. I mean, really prepare. And there are three things that you need to prepare. You need to have a clear view of what you want. Now, this sounds simple, but almost nobody has a clue of what they want and why it's important to them. They haven't thought about trade-offs. They haven't thought about, oh, what if somebody wants a project, let's say somebody's selling a project, a consulting project, and the client comes back and says, we're interested, but we want it in, 2/3 of the time.
Mm,
What does that mean to you? What are the implications of that on your price?
mm,
Most people, most solo entrepreneurs, and whether they're male or female, will go, oh, well, oh, because they're wanting the business, they'll go, "Oh, okay, right." And they'll work
mhm.
20-hour days, they'll work all weekends. They might, have to pay a lot of money to have extra help,
I have
right?
definitely found myself in this exact boat.
Right. And the problem is that people haven't analyzed what it is, how they do their business and how that should be translated into pricing. And
Mm,
so if you want something so my pricing model is such that we have a weighted factoring process. So we look and say, all right, so is this person difficult to deal with? They get a higher weighting. Is the counterpart really difficult? It's a higher weighting. How complex is this relationship? Higher complexity, higher weighting, right? So we actually created a pricing model to reflect this. So we have a baseline, a base number per $1 million in contract, and then we apply this weighting factor because we literally broke down every element that influences our ability to close a deal. Time to close. Does somebody need it to close in a month or do they have 6 months? That's a
mm,
different amount of effort, and
yeah.
so we take that into account. And so, but that's something that most people don't do. They don't take any of those things into account. So they really don't know what goes into kind of how they do their business. They have a high level view, but they've not put it on a paper and then put dollars and cents to what is sitting there. Then you have to analyze your counterpart, right?
Mm,
And that is who are you negotiating with, right? What are they like, right? I'm a huge fan of using LinkedIn. I can tell very quickly, is somebody a fast decision maker? And I can tell that if they write in bullet points. If they have paragraphs, they're a more traditional thinker. If they have acronyms after their name, they care about title. If they list every job that they've ever had in their 25-year history, they care about process. If they write in very short staccato and they have two of their last jobs, they care about speed. And so and that's an assumption that
mm,
it's a theory that I'm going to test in
mhm,
that. So know who you're negotiating, and then do a ton of work on who the company is that you're negotiating with. If you're selling to a company, if they have do they have what's their social media, what are they promoting on social media, what do they talk about on their social media, do they have a YouTube channel or a TikTok channel? Go watch the last anywhere from 2 weeks to a month, and then I always like to go back like 6 months and 12 months to watch a couple of things that they have posted, because I'm looking for a story, I'm not looking for a moment. Do a Google search and don't stop on page 1. Keep going. Go to page 10 and see what comes up, right? You're trying to create a story, because that's what negotiation is. Negotiation is a conversation about a relationship, and you can't win a relationship, but you can get more value out of it. And then the third thing you have to analyze is the situation in which you're negotiating. What's the economy? What's the market? Who are the competition? Who are your competitors, right? Who are your counterparts competitors? Who are your competitors? And then once you have a view of all that, and some of that you can do before you ever enter into the negotiation with a counterpart, you should always know the first part, which is you, and you can usually largely know the third part, which is the external environment. And so once you have a view of that, then you're just plugging and playing your counterpart into that scenario. So you, them, and it is the negotiation piece. And then you have to ask. And asking is the hardest part. You have to ask, you have to be flexible, you have to listen, and then you have to contract it and you have to live it. And the living of the contract, the living of the relationship, that's the part that very few people talk about. People talk about the point at which you get the deal, but they don't talk about what comes after. What happens if something goes wrong and you have to renegotiate, right? People don't talk about the after piece, because they kind of think, oh, I got it signed, so it's done. But it's not done. That's the beginning of hopefully a long-term relationship.
Mm, fascinating. I love that. And I want to just go back and like underline and have you unpack where you said like negotiation is a conversation about a relationship, and you can't win a relationship, but you can get more value out of it. Just that was like that blew my mind. It was like 2 sentences, but I really want you to like expound and make that a couple of paragraphs for me, because I think that's such a powerful insight for everything that we do. I really, yeah.
Yeah, so this is something that I also learned when I started to learn early in my negotiation career. And I found what I found, because when I was early in my career, I was a bit of a bull in a china closet. I, I had a mentor say, Christine, you can't just come in and beat somebody over the head with what it is you're trying to do. Um, and so I had to learn what subtlety meant, and I had to learn how to be firm about what I needed and wanted, but at the same time, do that in a way that created space to have a relationship. And what I find that I don't hear a lot of first of all, the women who talk about negotiation, most of them are professors or attorneys. I haven't met anyone from a business perspective who's doing this, who's a woman. Um, and the guys, they give the idea of empathy. Some of it's lip service, and then they devolve back into the haggle, because men are much better at haggling than women are.
Yeah.
We naturally want to build a relationship. That's how we are built. And um so I think that I just lost my train of thought. I had a senior
No,
moment.
no, I think that what I'm
Oh,
hearing
you're like,
though is like I feel like women should actually be better at this.
yeah.
We just don't seem to be trained for it, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and I find that women are better negotiators, because we are thinking about the longer term. If there's a haggling situation, um, that may be more something that I'd lean into having a guy do. Now, let's be clear. There are a lot of women who think negotiation is just haggling and beating the
Right.
crap out of their counterpart.
And
And
that's
there are a
probably
lot
why
of
they don't do it, right?
yeah. And then there are a lot of men who are really effective negotiators. So it isn't, some of it's not a male or female thing, though. There is a study out there that Boston University did that shows that they looked at boys and girls from the ages of, what was it? I think 3 or 4 to 10, and starting it and how they negotiate with the men and women in their lives. And boys negotiate equally across that entire time frame. girls negotiate equally with or negotiate across that time frame with women, but girls stop asking men for what they want starting at the age of 8. So there's some, they didn't look at this, the study did not explore why, but it is something to keep, since the audience here is mostly women, it is absolutely something for all of us to keep in mind. We
Mm-hmm.
are conditioned not to ask men in particular for what it is we want.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole lot of additional stuff on that.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that, you know, the idea of a conversation about a relationship, one of the misconceptions about a negotiation is that it's, you know, business is business,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not true. Negotiation is 100% emotional. Nobody signs a deal or agrees to do business with another person because they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that that value that you evaluated and think is there is going to be there. Nobody has that crystal ball. And so we hope that it will be there. So I often talk about how negotiation is a hopeful act. We
Mm-hmm.
negotiate with data and information from the past
Mm-hmm.
in the hope that we'll have a better future doing this deal together, and we have to negotiate in the present. um, and that is relationship, right? It's not about all the hardcore data that informs a decision, that provides us um, evidence that we can use in the conversation. But negotiation, really effective negotiation, is a give and take. It is, even though I'm doing a lot of talking here, I don't do that so much when I'm
I love
negotiating.
it.
I'm actually really, I'm quiet. Like if I'm meeting a counterpart for the first time, the first 2 or 3 meetings, almost, I might ask 2 or 3 questions that are really, really broad, because I'm going into that negotiation with my hypotheses and I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to test them. But I'm really trying to size up, how do these people, if there's more than one person, how do they interact together? Who do I think are the invisible negotiators that aren't at the table? How does my client interact
Mm-hmm.
with their own people? How do they interact with the counterpart? So I'm trying to assess all those things, because at the end of the day, the decision to do a deal or not is binary. And we do it
Mm-hmm.
because we have faith and hope that it's going to work. And to do that, we have to have trust in our counterpart, and that is an emotional decision.
Mm. Oh, that's so beautiful. And I love how you're really anchoring what we think of as a very cerebral, mechanistic experience of negotiating contracts in the business world, and really highlighting, yet no, everything in business is personal because it's with humans, right? It is a human interacting with another human.
Yeah.
And to your point, we both have our worldviews and our values and the people in our minds that we're thinking of, and how is this going to serve us and our loved ones and our the people we have a fiduciary responsibility to. And so to that point, I love that you're highlighting this trust is the core of everything that we do in every relationship. Can I trust this person to do what they say they're going to do, to have my back, to give me the benefit of the doubt, right? And so this is where I can see why when you went back and you're like, yeah, we waited for people who are difficult to work with. It is such a strange thing. Like, how do you quantify difficult to work with? Like, that's just one very curious question I have of like, just how do you even put a quantitative evaluation to what
Yeah.
seems like such a qualitative, uh, yeah, piece?
Yeah. So we have a very specific philosophy around negotiation, some of which I've shared.
Mhm.
Um, and we have there are kind of like 4 different styles of negotiating. And so what we find, and we have very clear view of our values, and so we use disqualifying questions. Instead of, we disqualify prospects, we
Mm,
don't qualify them, we disqualify them. And we disqualify them and to put our matrix, our scoring against it based on how aligned they are with our values. And we develop questions to test, are they aligned with our 6 core values? We evaluate what we listen for, what do we think their negotiation style is? Because if they're a really go in and beat the heck out of the counterpart, they're probably a bad fit for us. They're terrible negotiators, but they're also, and they could use our help. But the problem with that style is that no matter what we do, it will take a lot of effort on our part to get the client to buy into what we're doing, because they're just focused on one thing and they want, whatever that one thing is. So we've developed a set of filtering questions that allow us to come up with this idea. And it's not like the weighting matrix is really complicated. It's very, very simple. And so it doesn't take a lot and to kind of figure that out. But it's really driven off our values, because and one of the things that I think that a lot of people don't do or understand in their negotiation is their values. And it's really important in negotiation to know your values before your value, because your values drive how you show up at the negotiation table. And if your counterpart is diametrically opposed to your core values, run away from that deal. There are better opportunities in the market for you. And
I love that.
our values are also the metric that we use to walk away from deals. It's one of the metrics we use to walk away.
What are your 6 values? What are you using to determine if they're a good fit?
So curiosity is huge for us. Courage to, and that goes to vulnerability. So the courage to be raw with a prospect is one of the most powerful tools you can ever use, because it's disarming and it's a pattern interrupt for most people. So courage to be real within the organization and within our negotiations. Collaboration. Negotiating is very much of a collaborative act. And a lot of people don't think about it that way. They go in and they think, oh my gosh, I'm going to get what I want. And they're singularly focused. My favorite negotiations are when I'm either on Zoom, because most of our negotiation is on Zoom. Or if I'm in person, I'm sitting right next to my counterpart. We're whiteboarding together. We're problem solving together. We're testing, we're challenging, we're coming up with crazy ideas, and we're getting them, and we're doing all that to find a better outcome. Because if we only know what we know, if we only come to the table knowing what we know, and we know nothing. We think we know everything, and we absolutely know nothing, right? And so the reality is that by doing that collaborative thing and creating that collaborative environment, it just makes it so much easier to get to a more effective outcome. I knew you were going to ask me as soon as I said this thing.
So I got curiosity, I got courage, I got collaboration, which I just want to say I love alliteration, but for my kids, we have our 4 and we just added a fake C, but we have curiosity, courage. Now I'm having my own mind, but we have
like, what are the other ones?
What are the rest? Creativity is our next one, and the last one is the fake C, which is kindness. But compassion, that's the C we found for it.
I don't know why I can't remember the other 3 off the top of my head. You are the first.
I love it. We'll have to come back to it.
But I haven't talked about them in a little while. So
those first 3, curiosity, courage, and collaboration, are so beautiful just in life, right? If you can come to your relationships, your internal relationship with yourself, your external relationships with your loved ones, with employees, with potential clients, and just that open curiosity and the courage to be vulnerable. One of my employees was like, the thing I love best about you is your authenticity. Like, you are just completely open. I'm like, I don't actually know how else I would exist, but like, I can see how that looks like courage to other people.
And it does that. You know, before we started recording, you made a comment to me that I get a lot, and that's that people find me very intimidating.
Mhm.
And I really think one of the reasons is because I am just all out there. What you see is
Mhm.
what you get with me.
Yeah.
I don't BS. I call people, you know, like I was in a negotiation and the counterpart was like, "Oh, we love you. We want to use you. We want you to be our preferred vendor." Da 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 da. And my first comment was, "Oh, that's amazing. So you'll be okay putting a right of first refusal in the contract then?" Oh my God, I don't know that, you know, and I'm like, so then you just bullshit me. So I don't like that. I don't like it when somebody does that crap.
Mm.
And it's a complete waste of time. Things
Mhm.
like good cop, bad cop. Complete. I was in a negotiation and they were playing good cop, bad cop. And I let it go for the first meeting. And then I let it go for the second meeting. And then I was like, these guys are going to do this again. And so I called the good cop and I said, 10 minutes or half an hour. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, I'm really curious how long you guys practice your good cop, bad cop routine, because it's a complete waste of my time. So I'm assuming it's a waste of yours too. Right. And I never talked to the bad cop again. I got invited to go skiing in Aspen. I mean, it was right. And so the games that people play in negotiation, in sales, a big game is anchoring. I think it's
Mhm.
hilarious. I think
Mhm.
it's absolutely hilarious. And I tell my clients all the time, it's your choice to be anchored or not.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I choose never to be anchored because
Mhm.
I know I've done my homework. I've done the analysis. I know the numbers. I understand the market. I understand if my counterpart is bullshitting me. I understand what I need and want. And because I have such grounding in what's truth and what's not from a quantitative perspective, um, then it's like they can, if somebody comes and says, they say, oh, well, what, you know, and I say, what price, well, how much is this thing? And they say, you know, $100,000, but I put value of 10,000 on it. My,
Mm.
most people, their natural inclination is to go, oh my God, I can't get this for 10 grand. I have to raise my offer to get closer to that 100,000 in order for me to get it. So most people will literally increase their offer to something like $70,000. And
Mhm.
then they'll still go, okay, I'm 30,000 away. And if the counterpart goes, well, I might drop to 90, but I can't go anything, then
Mhm.
the buyer will say, well, would you do 80? No.
Mhm.
Well, would you do 82.5? You know, and that's the game. And
Yeah.
so when that happens to me, I tell clients, don't fall prey to the trap of getting anchored to a price. Stick to your analysis and use that as an opportunity. My numbers are very different from your numbers. So
Mhm.
help me understand your where you're coming from so I can see where we're different. And then we can see how we kind of overcome the delta. And then they'll say, well, what price are you? And I said, and then I'll respond, it clearly doesn't matter what price I'm at because I'm a long way from where you're at. Right.
Mm.
And one of the things that a lot of people do is they get stuck in this price kind of back and forth.
Mhm.
Price is an answer to a math problem. I
Mm.
don't care about the answer. I care about the math problem. I can negotiate the math. I cannot negotiate the price. So if I can break down the price into its constituent parts, there are assumptions in every part of the math problem. And if I can uncover what those assumptions are, now I can negotiate something. Now I have levers to use. But if I'm only focusing on price, I have no levers. All I can do is haggle back and forth and maybe start talking percentages and discounts and but that's it. That's all I have. But if I
Mm-hmm.
understand the math of how they got to the price, now I got
Mm.
something to work with.
Oh, that is so powerful because that's what I teach for overcoming objections is like if somebody says, I can't afford it, you can't come back with, oh, yes, you can. Like you don't get to argue with the conclusion. You can only argue with the premises. And so it's okay. It always has to be so you say you can't afford it. Tell me more about that, right? Which is exactly what you're saying is how did you come to that conclusion? What series of micro assumptions did you make to arrive at the I can't afford it conclusion? And to your point, I'm not going to be able to argue with the answer you put to your equation, but I can help you adjust those internal variables that you used within the equation to help you reach a different answer at the end of it. So powerful.
It's one of the more powerful things that we can do. I was
Mhm.
negotiating. I had a client who was looking to sell their business and they were approached by a buyer and we were talking about cap rate, which is a number that you
Yeah.
use to associate value. And they wanted to just focus on the number, the price. And
Mhm.
I went to the cap rate and they had 20 different metrics they were using. I negotiated every one of those metrics,
Mm.
all 20 of them, because that changes the answer to the question,
Yes. Right.
right? And so, and a lot of people don't do that. They'll just
Mhm.
negotiate the cap rate and go, oh, that's too high, that's too low, whatever. And it's like, but if you break it down into its constituent parts and you know how they're assessing the different pieces, then that makes a huge difference in your ability to get to a different deal.
Yeah, I love it. I have this mind. I'm like, I want to sell my company. And when I do, I want to hire Christine to do this for me. I love it. So if you are listening to Christine and you want to go deeper with her, definitely check her out. She's on LinkedIn, Christine McKay. Her website is Venn, VENN, like the diagram, capital N, capital C, capital E for Negotiation Center of Excellence. Do I remember that
Yes,
correctly?
yes.
.com. And so I know that you typically work with much larger organizations, but do you have any resources? Do I remember you having a book? Remind
I
me
do
how
have a
people
book.
can go deeper. Yeah,
Yes. So I have a book. I don't know. Yep. Why not ask a conversation
beautiful.
about getting more? And we do training classes. So we have
Mm,
a course coming up called Amplifying Your Leverage, which that's a really important thing. People, especially women, we go into a negotiation and we assume that somebody has more power, and that's a choice too. So we all have power at the negotiation table. Um, you'll hear people talk about power and leverage, and we leverage is something that we can voluntarily give away, and we often do.
mm,
So we have a class coming up that talks about how teaches people how do you take the leverage you have and make it more. How do you amplify that so you can get more of what you want? So we have that coming up on June 20th, and that's on the website. People can take a look at that and whatnot. And then we have a YouTube channel, and we have we're on TikTok. And so just under Venn Negotiation. And so you can find us there too.
beautiful. I love this. Thank you so much, Christine. I always enjoy our conversations so much and got so much out of today. And I think that the thing that I'm taking away, and then I'd love to hear kind of like one last what you want to remind people of. But for me, the biggest one was negotiation is just a conversation about relationship, and you can always get more value out of your relationships. So just having that thought process, like on a meta level, am I maximizing the value that I'm both giving and receiving within my relationships, and how can I negotiate those better? So yeah, as a last reminder for our listeners, what's one thing that you really want them to take away and hold close to their hearts as they leave this conversation?
You're always negotiating with a person. And no matter what, you're negotiating with a human being. And having worked across the globe, I know that in my experience, all human beings care about the same thing. And if somebody gets mad at you, if somebody, or they act like they're mad at you, if they, I've had people do all sorts of things at the negotiation table. It's not about you, right?
Mhm.
You may be reminding them of something in their history that's really uncomfortable for them. You don't know what happened to them on the way to the meeting. So just remember that, your counterpart's reaction to you is not a reason for you to shy away from asking for what you want. Be knowledgeable about who you are and what's important to you, and turn things over to the universe too, because you cannot control the outcome of a negotiation. You can only control the input, the things that you can influence.
Mhm.
You can't control what somebody else does or agrees with or anything like that. And be open, be open to letting that go, because if somebody decides they don't want to do a deal with you, or if somebody does that with me, I'm like, thank you, universe, because I know that there was going to be a nightmare down the road if I tried to force that. So
Mhm.
be okay with whatever outcomes happen, and don't try to force those. Just focus on what you can control in the negotiation, and let the universe take care of the rest.
Yeah, there's this great mantra by Florence Scovel Shinn that she says, this or something better. So whenever I'm going into a sale or a negotiation, it's always like, either this will work out exactly the way I want it to, and it's going to be beautiful, or there's going to be something better if this doesn't work out. So it's a really great reminder. Thank you so much, Christine. I appreciate you and look forward to going deeper on negotiating.
Thank you, Caitlin.